President-elect Biden pledged to change the course of the pandemic in the U.S. while introducing key members of his health team this afternoon. The batch of nominees is headlined by Mr. Biden's pick for Health and Human Services Secretary, California Attorney General Javier Becerra. The president-elect then laid out his priorities for the beginning of his time in office. He asked for the Trump administration's help to make the vaccine distribution process run smoothly.
We also need the Trump administration to act now, though, to purchase the doses it has negotiated with Pfizer and Moderna, and to work swiftly to scale manufacturing to U.S. populations and the world. This can be fixed. If it is fixed, my team will be able to get at least 100 million vaccinations done in my first 100 days. Masking, vaccinations, opening schools. These are the three key goals for my first 100 days.
Ed O'Keefe and Liz Goodwin join me now. Ed is a CBS News political correspondent with the president-elect in Delaware, and Liz is the deputy Washington bureau chief for the Boston Globe. Welcome. It's good to see you both again. So, Ed, what did we learn from this speech about how the Biden administration wants to govern with respect to the pandemic, and what potential Republican opposition that could face?
Well, he set 3 goals for his first 100 days in office. So let's remember that he did that when, on like day 7 or 8 of his administration, he bats away the idea that the 100-day mark matters. He said 3 things. 1, he'd like to see Americans join him in wearing masks for the first 100 days of his administration, and said that he would ensure that there would be a mask mandate on all federal property where he has oversight, where he can do that with an executive order, and on interstate travel. So buses that cross state lines, trains, airplanes, much of which already is happening regardless. Second, and perhaps most notably, he said he wants 100 million doses of the vaccine distributed, at least, in his first 100 days in office. And he said the team that he's assembled, that he introduced today, will be chiefly responsible for ensuring that that begins to happen. Third, he wants to see what he said is a majority of the nation's schools reopen by the end of those first 100 days, understanding that that is not only an economic assistance, if you will, to working families that need the kids in school so that the parents can focus on working, but also an attempt to ensure that kids are getting the education they need, and in many ways addressing not only their education, but to some extent their mental health, and in many cases also, frankly, their nutrition, because schools, of course, serve as a way to feed so many of the country's neediest children as well. So 3 bold goals there set today. Those are pretty clear markers that he wants to be measured on in those first 100 days. And he said the one thing that will help make that happen, and this is critical, is more congressional funding, particularly when it comes to the vaccine. He says Congress is going to have to put up the money for what he described as what could be one of the most expensive projects in government history.
Well, Liz, this morning, Dr. Moncef Slaoui, the chief scientist for the Trump administration's Operation Warp Speed, appeared to be caught flat-footed when asked about President Trump's executive order prioritizing coronavirus vaccines being shipped to Americans before other nations. Let's take a listen.
Can you explain this executive order the president is going to be putting out? I don't quite understand. He's saying that foreign countries aren't going to be able to get the vaccine until everybody here in the United States gets it. It sounds like the problem is the opposite right now. Pfizer has made deals with other countries that are going to limit the supply here.
Frankly, I don't know. And frankly, I'm staying out of this, so I can't comment. I literally don't know.
But you're the chief science advisor for Operation Warp Speed.
Our work is rolling. We have plans. We feel that we can deliver the vaccines as needed. So I don't know exactly what this order is about.
So, Liz, if that is the response from the current administration's chief science advisor for Operation Warp Speed, what does that then suggest about coordination or lack thereof between the outgoing and incoming administrations?
That was a really interesting moment because, he is the chief science advisor for Operation Warp Speed, and they're engaging in this massive task of distributing millions, eventually 100 millions of doses of vaccine. There are, on the one hand, it's so impressive that, we've gotten this far with a vaccine that the reported efficacy is so high, and that happened in a very short period of time. So not to diminish kind of that achievement, there are signs of trouble, I think, in the distribution phase, which is just as logistically complicated as the research and development phase. Originally the Trump administration said there would be at least 100 doses going out before January 1st. The latest is that it's going to be more like 40 million. The drug companies themselves are saying they're having supply chain issues, and they're scaling back their own estimates for how many doses they can produce and deliver on. So I think it's going to be a huge challenge for the Biden administration coming in to deliver on that part. Just because you have a vaccine doesn't mean it's in people's arms, as Joe Biden has said. And this is kind of a sign of that challenge.
Well, Ed, we are now just about 6 weeks away from Inauguration Day, January 20th. Planning is underway for what will likely be a non-traditional ceremony, given the expected state of the pandemic. Tell us what happened at this meeting of top congressional leaders during their organization meeting earlier in the day.
Yeah, and we should caution that this isn't necessarily a huge development, but it is symbolic of the kind of griping that is still going on between the two parties up on Capitol Hill. Democrats and Republicans got together to do some year-end business. The Speaker, the Minority Leader in the House, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and others, to essentially discuss what is the order of business to be done here before Christmas, the important work regarding COVID relief, keeping the lights on across the government, and the big defense policy bill. But the other factor is this forthcoming inaugural ceremony that really is actually primarily the responsibility of Congress. There is a joint committee put together of senators and members of the House that's essentially supposed to serve as the party hosts. And traditionally, this is a very grand, elaborate, and secure event that draws hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to Washington for this formal event that occurs usually between the hours of like 10 and 2:30 on Inauguration Day. Begins with the bands playing, the crowd showing up, the actual swearing-in ceremony, the speech, and then a bipartisan lunch involving the new president, members of his cabinet, and members of the House and Senate. But none of this is potentially doable right now in the midst of the pandemic. During the conversation today, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer says he introduced a resolution or proposal that Congress pass a resolution formally acknowledging that this joint committee has been stood up and is making preparations for President-elect Biden's inauguration on January 20th. 3 Democrats in the room voted yes for it. The 3 Republicans in the room voted no. Perhaps not surprising. You got to understand, this isn't necessarily just about publicly acknowledging the victory of the president-elect. There is a more short-term problem for these Republican leaders, and that is they've got to keep their folks together on those 3 critical pieces of legislation. Again, the COVID relief, however it's passed, keeping the lights on across the government so there isn't another shutdown, and this defense policy bill, which now may require Congress to override a threatened veto from the president because it includes some things he doesn't like, including renaming military bases that are named for Confederate war generals. So a lot of different kinds of politics involved there. There's the meta, obviously, presidential level politics, but there's also the fact that there are some real sensitive issues that these 2 caucuses, Republican and Democrat, are going to have to deal with in the next few days. And McConnell, especially, the Senate Majority Leader, is not in the mood to upset his apple cart when he doesn't have to. And this was one of those examples. Obviously, infuriating to Democrats and others who, have acknowledged reality, and that is that President-elect Biden will become president on January 20th. But as someone who's covered Congress, I can tell you this was also partly designed to, avoid a potential last-minute fight here in the midst of some really important work that has to get done before Christmas.
Well, Liz, a new report from Moody's Analytics shows nearly 12 million renters will owe an average of $5,800 on back rent and utilities by January. Where does Congress stand on their efforts on aid to the country as we see more lawmakers, including some Republicans, push for another round of direct payments like the $1,200 checks many received in the spring?
It does feel like if you've been watching Congress the past few months that, you might have sort of lost faith in the idea that there is going to be a deal, because it seems like they've been talking about it for so long and just nothing has gotten done on it. But that said, there really are signs that something really could happen this time. There's a bipartisan group of moderate lawmakers, including Joe Manchin, Susan Collins, who have been coalescing around a deal of about $908 billion in aid that would include extending not kicking people out of their apartments, extending some of this unemployment relief, these things that are going to expire right around the Christmas season, which would, really be a tragedy for a lot of families. And that is really making some progress. Leader McConnell seems to be happy about that deal. That said, not everything is worked out in that. There's kind of unlikely bedfellows of Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Josh Hawley, who've been pushing for checks to be a part of that deal because it's been a really long time since Americans got the last $1,200 check of relief. And there's senators who are pushing for that to be in that $908 billion compromise. And of course, that would make it cost more than $908 billion. So it's still things being worked out, but it does appear that the White House Republicans and Democrats are closer on this than they've been in a long time.
All right, perhaps a bit of good news on the horizon potentially. Ed O'Keefe and Liz Goodwin, great to have you both. Thank you.